Welcome to JasonWhiskyWise. My name is Jason. Welcome to this whiskey review where today we're going to be looking at Nikka's Coffey Grain Whisky. Now, this is part of my little series into some Nikka products. Last video we covered Nikka from the barrel, and if you actually have missed any of the videos, I'll leave a link to the playlist in the top corner. So, we've got ourselves this whiskey. I've got a little bit left of the bottle because grain whiskey to me is something I really appreciate, but I feel a lot of people miss out on because they just mainly look at single malt whiskies, but I'll develop that further. So Nikka produced this, and it's called the Coffey Grain Whisky. It doesn't actually mean coffee because I've had a lot of people ask me when I've done tastings, Jason, does it contain coffee in this whiskey? It's actually the name referred to the still they use, which is a patent or a continuous still, which they use for grain production. Now, I'm going to see if I can leave a picture over here, and I think, actually it's got a picture on here on the back. It says here, the Nikka Grain Whisky is distilled in a Coffey still, which is traditional and very rare. It's a patent still that Nikka imported from Scotland in 1963. So it's something you don't really see a lot of companies use because it's mainly for grain production. And in Scotland, you've got around about, I think, 7 grain distilleries still in production, but not many people look towards grain, and I feel that's where people are missing out, as I've got at the minute a massive sort of favouring towards grain distilleries. So getting back to Nikka, in terms of actually grain and grain whiskey in Japan, you've got 2 distilleries, the Cheetah producing for Suntory, and you've got Miyagikyo producing for Nikka. And the Nikka Coffey Grain is from the Miyagikyo distillery. Now, in terms of the actual parent company, it is the Nikka Whisky Distilling Company Limited, or also known as Asahi Beverages, and it is a no-age statement whiskey, this one. It's bottled at 45%. And in terms of the price point on that bottle over there, it's around about 55 to around about 60 pounds here in the UK. So it's got a fairly up there with its price for a no-age statement whiskey, as a Japanese whiskey as well, and also being a grain. Because if you look at grain whiskey, compare its price to Scotland, actually I'll talk about that at the end, so we'll have a nice conclusion. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the nose in this whiskey. Into the nose. First impressions on the nose for the Nikka Coffey Grain. It's got a nice sweetness about it, and that's something very distinctive. When you look at almost any grain distillery, you're looking at a nice inviting sweetness. Some can be a little bit sharp, but some are very well rounded, and that's what this one delivers straight up on the nose. It's got almost a sherbety character, which sort of straight away gives you almost like a lemony sherbet. It's then got a little hints of coconut with a little burst of vanilla. And for me, it's almost like vanilla essence. And then you've got this almost like a toffee popcorn character, which really just, it's like, it reminds me when you go to the cinema and you can just smell that sweeter popcorn instead of smelling the salty one, the sweeter one. It does have a floral character. And for me, this floral character straight away more towards a lavender. But straight away, also that note of coconut really just keeps bouncing back into my mind. And it's almost like coconut shavings. That is a gorgeous nose. I'm a big fan of grain, so yeah, let's get straight into the palate next. Slanger. So arrival onto the palate for the Nikka Coffey Grain. In terms of the arrival, it's actually quite soft. It's actually light. You're not looking at loads of flavours up front, but you do get a nice medium texture about this one. You're getting a little bit of spice, a little heat, but not a peppery spice. You're looking at more of a mouth-warming presence, almost like a ginger nut biscuit, which then develops. You're getting hints of cardamom coming into this one, and then a honeydew melon, adding a little bit more of a fruitier dimension. And it's just so mouth-watering. I actually want to jump straight back in for another sip, so I'm going to do that, and we'll come some more notes. So second sip-wise, it really just makes you want to just revisit this whiskey again and again. But there's a slight biscuity character about this one. It reminds me of custard cream biscuits with a little bit of that sort of custardy insides. You've then got almost like shortbread, and you get a sweet citrus just sort of holding itself down the end of almost like a nectarine. But it does have a youthful character about it, almost like a slight astringency to it. Not biting, but it's just there telling you that this is a young whiskey. Let's get into the finish and we'll come to our conclusions. So now for the overall finish in this whiskey, and that's something I was just sort of savouring here just on the end. I'll pop that down. So in terms of the flavour profile I'm getting on the finish, it's got a nice long finish. You're getting these characters, those shortbread, those toffee popcorn, caramel, and it's all wrapped together with a sort of faint citrus character, just sitting there in the background, not really trying to be dominant, which is really enjoyable on this grain. So in terms of my rating, I'm going to give this an 87 out of 100, and I'll explain that right for you right now. So in terms of whiskey's actual balance and its complexity, it's got a lot going on for grain whiskey. In terms of when I put it to the category versus world grain whiskey, and I'm talking about Baines, I'm talking about Cheetah, I'm talking about other grain whiskies from all around the world, this one ticks all the boxes. It's got great flavor profile, a nice appeal, enjoyable, but then I've got to put it into the category of grain whiskey as a whole versus Scotland. And when I look at the price point for me says to me, Jason, it's a bit too high in its price. It should be maybe between 35 and 40 pounds, maybe 45, giving it that bracket of 35 to 45. It's now pushing 55 to 65, and it's just 20 pounds, I'd say, a bit too much than what I feel it's worth. The reason behind that, when I was in Scotland recently, there was a bottling for a Caledonia, which is a closed distillery. It was a 34-year-old, and that was £100. And that just goes to show you its competition in the grain market, as the grain whiskey market shouldn't be super pricey, as they're able to produce so much whiskey in such a short space of time. However, when I do look at it, I really do enjoy the flavor profile. In terms of does it need water, I personally wouldn't do it. It just, when I've tried it previously, it's collapsed the whiskey. And when I've had it, given it a bit of time, that's where this one really starts to develop further. And it sort of takes off that youthful character. Straight off the top, that little bit of oxidization helps it a lot more. So I'd highly recommend, if you're drinking this one, give it some time, let it open in your glass. But 87 out of 100, I really like the flavor profile. Only thing I've got a really, a thing about on this one is the price point. I feel 55 to 65 is too much of an asking price. So personally, I like to see the company bring it down a little bit, just make it a bit more approachable for a lot more people to get into the category of grain whiskey. But on that note, I'm going to leave it at that. If you guys have enjoyed, drop it a thumbs up. I'll leave a subscribe button over here if you're new, so feel free to subscribe. And also check out some other Nikka videos on the screen. This has been me, JasonWhiskyWise, a silent Mr. Bananas, and we'll catch you for the next video. Slàinte.